Is Loot Reborn season for Diablo 4 what Reaper of Souls expansion was for Diablo 3? Or perhaps it's a desperate attempt of Blizzard to save the sinking ship? These are the questions we will answer in this video. To do that, I think we should first take a step back and look at the problems Diablo 4 had prior to Season 4. And only then we will discuss the current state of the game during Loot Reborn. So let's start with the past. Perhaps you can relate to my trend with Diablo 4 prior to Season 4. Typically I would install the game when the season hits, then level a character or two to level 50, sometimes even 70, and then immediately get bored with the game. Seasonal content and patch changes felt very underwhelming, and the core endgame loop was non-existing. Season 3 of Diablo 4 didn't even get me that far. I uninstalled the game by level 20th. This pattern was caused by quite a lot of problems I had with the game before Season 4. The first issue I had was overly convoluted, in wrong ways, stats design. Diablo 4 had bloated stats pool with lots of useless affixes. The damage on Tuesday meme comes to mind. This resulted in most gear dropped being an absolute crap. Then the skill system was very underwhelming and basic. Most skill modifications come actually from aspects in Diablo 4, not the skill system itself. So the skill tree feels very bland, with max 2 choices per skill that are often insignificant in how you play your build. Paragon board is just a boring and plain stat boost that doesn't offer any interesting choices. Where the power and build diversity actually comes from in Diablo 4 are the legendary powers, aka aspects. But the problem with aspects was their scarcity. Really good aspects found on gear could be imprinted only once, which made me hoard on powers rather than use them freely in the game. I often ended up finishing my seasonal playthrough never really using that cool power because I was still waiting for the right piece to put it on. Plus, despite aspects being so damn important and build defining, Blizzard somehow managed to make loot boring for the most part. Rarely did I feel hyped when dropping an item. Uniques felt very underwhelming, while Uber Uniques were so damn rare that you could play tons of hours and not see one. I know I didn't. So, all in all, we were left with the worst skill tree system in the genre, plus boring loot and powers design preventing players from using said powers. A recipe for a disaster in ARPG. On top of that, the gameplay in Diablo 4 just had a bad, boring flow. The game felt like developers were constantly trying to stop you from having fun in the game. You want to spam some cool skills? Well, let us mana starve you to death. There was also way too much running around with too few mobs to fight, especially in the open world. Maps had low density of enemies, then when you found enemies, they were either dying super quickly in just couple of hits, or if they didn't, you were left with a downtime on abilities or without any mana left, spamming your basic filler skills more than having fun. Many classes felt underwhelming during the leveling process, as it took really long time to start feeling the power fantasy going and the build coming together for your character. The build diversity and flexibility was also super lackluster for an ARPG. This was most apparent with classes like Barb or Sorceress. Most of their builds utilized the same supporting skills like shouts or defensive abilities. And lastly, Diablo 4 had no endgame, besides running nightmare dungeons over and over again. It would be perhaps alright if dungeons were actually fun, but they often had boring maps with a lot of backtracking involved and tons of downtime without fighting monsters. All of these issues resulted in Diablo 4 being an extremely underwhelming title since the release. Every new season bringing less excitement, as the hopes for the proper Diablo title were dying out. After all, even the biggest fans of the franchise have finite amount of patience with their beloved game. And now let's shift our attention to the present, the Season 4 called Loot Reborn, a season full of hope and anticipation, but also skepticism and anxiety. Diablo franchise fans kept wondering, will the game be finally a quality ARPG worthy of the Diablo name? Or will Blizzard continue making underwhelming attempts at fixing symptoms and not dealing with the underlying problems? So how good is this update? Well, there are a lot of things that Loot Reborn has improved. First, while not perfect, the statistics system in the game is in a better place than it was before. Some of the conditional stats are still here, but overall, the game offers more simplified and straightforward stats pools available on items than it did before. There's less bloat, resulting in more items having an actual value and possibility to upgrade your character. Plus, the game's stats customization and diversity improved thanks to new mechanic called tempering. Tempering adds extremely powerful statistics on your gear. Having 100% increase to damage is a game-changing buff to your character. The addition of tempering made loot much more fun, as it pumps the power fantasy higher, giving us that pleasant fun kick that we are all craving. But tempering created a problem. Unique pieces are weak in comparison. This is because uniques cannot be tempered, which is a bummer, especially with ancestral gear that allows 2 tempering stats on a single piece of item. My other concern with tempering is that while the system is very fun, the stats values from tempering are absurd, making their importance disproportionate to anything else on the item. It reminds me of how powerful set items were in Diablo 3, with their 1000 damage boosts to certain abilities, making sets a must-have for many builds. Loot Reborn also improved how early level experience feels in Diablo 4. We have Iron Wolves, whose rewards are the seasonal thing in Loot Reborn, and they give you good legendaries and uniques early on, making early leveling smoother and faster than before. Leveling your alts is especially easy and fast, and that's because tempering manuals are account-wide, which gives your alts insane boost to stats. You can, for instance, put few thousand thorns on your set, making enemies kill themselves in one hit. There are also more ways now to get your mana-like resources going, making the leveling process more entertaining than before. But unfortunately, early leveling is not smooth sailing for all classes. Some classes breeze through the leveling, like Necromancer. Others still struggle to generate resources and then end up casting basic abilities way too often. Looking at you, Druid. Overall, when it comes to leveling, I would love Blizzard to even out the smoothness and balance classes in this aspect of the game. As it currently stands, your leveling experience will vary heavily depending on which class and build you decide to use. Now let's talk about the gameplay flow of Diablo 4 in Loot Reborn. The flow is much better now. The density of enemies has been greatly improved, both in open world and nightmare dungeons. On top of that, Hell Tides are now basically constant activity and are also available in World Tier 1 and 2. This makes open world much more enjoyable, diverse and intense experience, both in the endgame and during the leveling process. Nightmare dungeons seem to have better design and less backtracking now. I found myself actually enjoying running them, which was not the case before. Plus, the side events and corrupted shrines challenges are also rewarding activities to do right now. They provide great amount of experience. The flow is also improved thanks to mentioned earlier resources generating options available on your gear. It's much easier for us now to resolve our mana problems or to reduce our cooldowns. This results in a much smoother flow where you are more busy casting your favorite abilities rather than causing downtime with bland and boring fillers. This season of Diablo 4 offers also a much needed rework to how Codex of Power works. No longer are extracted legendary powers consumable for one use only. Now, when you extract a power from an item, it is added to the codex with the highest value you have extracted for your infinite use. Honestly, this change might be my favorite part of the whole freaking season. The infinite use of extracted powers promotes experimentation and actually using these powers. Instead of making you question using the power, the game tells you to use it freely as much as you want, and that's awesome. And lastly, the endgame feels better in Season 4, for a simple reason. It actually exists now in the form of Pit. Pit is similar to Greater Rifts in Diablo 3. Those are short instance dungeons with theoretically infinite scaling, and the objective of Pit is one: kill enemies. But is Pit enough to make Diablo 4 endgame fun for years to come? I don't think so. Adding a feature similar to what previous game in the series had already years ago seems hardly like an achievement worth celebrating. Pits are also nowhere near as deep of a system as Path of Exile's endgame. Hell, Diablo's endgame is not even as robust as Last Epoch's. And remember that Last Epoch just came out with 1.0 release earlier this year and was published by an indie studio with 50 employees? But the addition of Pits is definitely a step into the right direction. It adds something to chase, especially for people who like to push their builds to the limits. Pit also adds element of diversity into the endgame gameplay loop. As it stands, we have basically 3 main activities to spam in the endgame: Helltides, Nightmare Dungeons, and now the Pit. So far this number of activities works quite fine, but who knows how our moods will be in few weeks of doing the same 3 things over and over again. So is Diablo 4 now a worthy ARPG to be played in 2024? The answer is kinda. The game is certainly in a much better place than it was before. It's objectively a better game right now. But Diablo 4 is not the best in the business in anything it does. Well, maybe besides the open world aspect of the game, since other ARPGs don't focus on that. And none of the Loot Reborn changes sound particularly impressive when taken separately. Pit is not a revolutionary endgame system for ARPGs. Tempering and masterworking don't make the loot in Diablo 4 nowhere near the most interesting in the genre. And the changes to how legendary powers work and the amount of powers available do not make build crafting the deepest one on the market. They don't even fix how poor the skill trees are in Diablo 4. But when you look at the big picture, when you take all these additions and changes together, the improvement to how well the game flows and how much more fun it offers are very noticeable. So coming back to our initial question, is Loot Reborn to Diablo 4 what Reaper of Souls was for Diablo 3? The answer is no. We should remember that Reaper of Souls came with a substantial expansion of content, new class, plus Loot 2.0. As is, Loot Reborn feels more like just the Loot 2.0 update part of it, so it's not a change of the same magnitude. Still, Loot Reborn is the biggest step Blizzard took with Diablo 4 since the release, and it's a step into the right direction. The direction of making their game more fun, with better, smoother flow, a direction towards better statistics, loot, and plenty of QoL changes. And as a result, Diablo 4 Season 4 has been the most fun I've had with this game since the release.